Hey guys, so I thought I was going to talk about something that is very popular today and a little bit about what I think about it in terms in JavaScript land. So you know probably by now that functional programming is all the rage, and as things go, when something is really hyped up, everybody goes completely crazy with everything. And one of the most complicated structures or complicated concepts in functional programming is monads. Now, I'm not going to try and explain exactly what a monad is. I think that there are some really nice things you can check out to do that. Like Egghead.io has an amazing video series called, I think it's something like Professor Frisbee Explains Functional Programming or something. It's basically a badger who tells you all the things you wanted to know about functional in JavaScript, of course. And there's also a book on GitHub which goes through the exact same thing. These two concepts are amazing, so look at those. And what I wanted to talk about is basically that I argue that although functional programming is great, I think that the investment, if you wanted to use monads, is really high for a language such as JavaScript. What I'm trying to say is that if you are going to do monads, don't do them necessarily in JavaScript unless you are prepared for the impact that is going to have. Now, I have seen some, well, I'm pretty sure that they think that they are senior developers. I don't really think that they are when I see these things, but in essence, I've seen a few examples of people creating the maybe monad and the either monad and using it in just a few places, and most likely thinking that they feel very clever about themselves. Now, why I argue that this is bad is because you're simply adding a lot of complexity and overhead into your code base. And why I think it makes even less sense in JavaScript is because JavaScript is not a strictly typed language, it's a loosely typed language. So what I'm trying to capture here is basically that when you have a monadic programming way of working, you need to be sure that everybody on the project knows how all of this works. And it's even more important when it comes to JavaScript. And the reason why I think you should think twice about doing things in JavaScript is, as I said, it doesn't have types. And now you're going to ask me why, Frederick, why is types so important when you want to do monadic computing or monad-based programming? And I say, well, if you think about it, every input to a function in JavaScript is not required to be there. What that means is basically that you have, from inside of the function, no guarantees ever. If you just look at things from the world, from the scope of the function never knows that there's going to be a value passed into it. So in theory, if we were really rigorous and hardcore programmers, and of course everybody is, we would have at the beginning of every single function we wrote a check to check whether or not the value is there, if it's the right thing that we're expecting, and all this validation, a lot of assertions would take place at the top of every function. Now, all the seniors, everybody, and these are people who have been working in this industry for so much more, a longer time than I have, even they, when I talk to them about it, admit that, yeah, I should probably be doing that, but I never do, and so forth. And the reason why we never do is because when we developers work on a piece of software, we usually have the scope or the flow of events that's going to take place in a certain path in the software in our head. So we know, because we are the writer of all this code, that, oh yeah, this is how everything is going to work together. You think about things in terms of how it's going to work together, and therefore you know that you don't have to do all this validation up front in some cases, because you know it's, you know, in theory never going to happen. But you know, if you want to be really functional and be really robust, a writer of robust code, then you should be doing that. So how does this tie into monads? Well, if you think about it, the maybe monad is designed to allow you to run a function without knowing whether or not the value is going to be there. So if you think about that conceptually, that means that every single function you write in JavaScript, because you never have, it's not typed, so you have no idea if the value is going to be there, then every single function you have should use a maybe monad every single time for all inputs. And this is actually, I think it's a, I'm not saying that it's a bad idea. I'm simply stating that if you wanted to work in this way, if you wanted to use monadic computation or whatever, then you know, in the example I was saying, looking at earlier, like when I've seen this person use an either and a maybe in a few places, if that person truly understood how, like, the intention behind the maybe monad and like how this is supposed to work, then you would, that person would have used the maybe monad everywhere for every single function, but they didn't. They didn't. And that tells me, I'm not saying that like I'm some super coder or something like, but that communicates to me that they don't understand what the intention behind the maybe monad is. They're simply using it because it's cool. That's what I think. And that's also why I think that you have to be a little bit pragmatic when you apply these concepts to your code. Do I think that functional programming is a great idea for JavaScript? Yes, I do. I think that there are things in functional programming that are very well suited for code just in general. A lot of good concepts, but I don't think monads is necessarily a good idea for a code base. Not in the way, I argue that if we wanted to make monadic programming a thing in JavaScript, then we would have to re-educate most of the industry. Like, because it's such, in my opinion, the benefits, it's the same type of thing that I feel about TypeScript and Flow and all of these ways that we're trying to add types into the mix. The real benefits to this really only shows themselves when you have full coverage. And as I said, if you wanted to use monads in a sane way, or to really leverage the power that they bring to the table in JavaScript, then every single function needs to take a maybe, all of them. And you can ask yourself, do you think that code is going to get simpler or more complex? And this problem would probably, and if you think about it, if it had types, then you would not necessarily have to have a maybe for every single value. But yeah, that's simply the way I'm thinking. So really think twice before you're throwing your own monads into JavaScript, because trust me, I don't think you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. I think you're doing it because it's cool.